I hereby call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on February 1st, 2023 at 7 p.m. I'm Linda Lukowski, Chair of the School Committee. I want to welcome all of us here tonight. And we don't have anybody for the communications from the public. I'll read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we will just get right into this. Brian?
Let's just do this, I guess. So I'm going to hand this over to Kyle to, it was in board docs and you have a copy in front of you to place in your binder, a summary based on our latest and greatest effort to pause.
I just want to say that Erin is remote as well.
Yeah. And we'll have to roll call vote every vote in this.
Thank you. Yes. So this was our first attempt. Again, we met on Saturday. We're meeting tonight. We'll meet again next week on the 8th, and then you'll vote a tentative budget on Thursday, February 16th. Thank you for your flexibility there. We are hopeful that we will have information from the state, something, whether it be concrete information or some type of information that we can read the tea leaves on to be able to make some educated guesses about the assessments for our member towns. So what we're working with tonight is your charge to us, which was working towards an aggregate increase to our member towns of no more than $2.5 million. So with that, there's nothing new on these sheets, but I'll have Kyle take a step back and walk you through the iteration from Saturday and what's translated to in front of you tonight.
Thank you. So the document, just working from left to right there, you can see we've listed all of, this is the same format as what you saw on Saturday. We have right there in the middle, the column for the request that matches what you saw on Saturday. The only difference here being on Saturday, there were an additional columns for where we prioritized as cost mitigating, must do, cost mitigating, higher priority, and lower priority. So within those prioritizations, we then showed what's included and what's not included in a potential total request. I'll walk through these somewhat quickly since there isn't too much new. Quick 5-minute rundown. So looking at the elementary schools, all three, we have included the increase in supplies and services for each that are associated with the CKLA consumables as well as the math and focus consumables. Those were all shown as must-dos on Saturday, so that's why they're in the included column there. A couple highlights of what wasn't included. The instructional assistants at Newbury Elementary School, even though those were shown in the cost mitigating column on the presentation on Saturday. Right now, we have funding. We have positions funded in the budget to meet all current one-to-one IEPs. So while these two additional positions would be excellent, and we did show them as cost mitigating because it helps out when we're looking at the totals that we're dealing with right now, we've excluded that from the current proposal. Similarly, with the Pine Grove School, the special education teacher there, half-time, FTE plus benefits, 53,205. That was shown in the cost mitigating previously. So this was services where we've been using Wilson tutors, contracted out, not a position in-house, but a contracted out position that's been funded through ESSER. We continue to winnow down the use of those services. And internally, we're talking about how, while a halftime teacher is an option to meet those accommodations, there are also other options that could potentially be on the table that may be less expensive than this. So we expect to, by next week, have an alternative there for you. But that's why it's been excluded from this initial presentation. Salisbury Elementary School, all of those items were either shown as high priority or lower priority. There weren't any that were must-do or cost mitigating, so that's why they aren't translated into the included column there. Going on to page 2, at the middle school, the math specialist, that is a halftime position that is currently funded through ESSER. When we looked at our total available ESSER funding through September 30th of 2024, that halftime position for next year is included in the earmarked amounts of that grant. So we do currently have funding for it next year. We just want to find a way to transition that role into the operating budget, but not at this time. So that position wouldn't go away. It's just not included in the operating budget. The instructional assistant, the library, again, looking at the must-dos here. Working our way down to the high school, these were all shown as high-priority items. When we talked with Pat, there were, Principal Kelly, there were items in there that were certainly beneficial. The Camp Cedar Mills, sending students there, but we found that those were high-priority items. So they've been excluded from this initial proposal. Working down to athletics, and again, I'll just, feel free to jump in if you want to talk about something, but I can.
I have a question.
Yep.
Does the high school have reading specialists and math specialists?
Thank you for mentioning that, actually. So I glossed over that. The reading specialist position, we have a .2 request there. So we have, again, some options here. Within the high school regular education salaries line item, it's a bit unique to the elementary schools where there are often .2s, so teachers will teach during their planning time, and there's a lot of oscillation there. So we felt that there was a very strong potential where that 19,684 could just be absorbed into the usual changes that we experience every year. So that's why it wasn't in the included column.
Just because when I heard Mr. McCrae's presentation, he was mentioning how many students he had there that were struggling with reading.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned that these students will then go up to the high school, and we don't have any reading specialists or math specialists up there to support those students.
Yeah, and I apologize. There probably could be a better notation there to show that we would like to move forward with that, but just similarly with the middle school math specialist, right? We're not proposing that this position will go away. It's just it will be funded through a different funding source.
Okay.
But to confirm, there are not math or reading specialists at the high school.
Then what happens to students that on their IEP or something where they need some specialized reading or specialized math intervention?
So as a general rule, as you get into the high school, the breadth of programming and opportunity within a 6-day, 7-period rotating with a drop, whether it be special education services or other supports, different programs, academic support. The hope is that a reading interventionist isn't needed by high school. But in the interim, I don't know if Anna wants to jump in. I think those students tend to end up on an IEP or receiving direct services that way.
Okay.
If by the high school they're not able to.
Because Mr. McCrae's presentation was there was a large number of students that were either coming to the middle school or in the middle school that were struggling with reading. Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question? Just
Absolutely, thank
clarify.
you.
Not including the increase in supplies and services for the middle school and high school, that increase, was that just the 7% that they were talking about for inflation?
A great question. So at the middle school level, there was the inflation factor there, and then there was also a world language curriculum adoption. At the high school level, there were numerous savings and asks offsetting each other, but some of the more significant items were the Camp Cedar Mills programs, where at the start of the year, there were students who were going, that was the tune of about $20,000 of that ask. Probably about 10,000 of it was additional, the remaining 10 to 15 was the 5 to 7%.
So looking at this, we're talking about level funding for supplies.
Doing more with less, yeah. Doing less with the same, yeah. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. I'll jump into athletics. So here, athletics, these weren't included in the the contractual increases in coaching stipends, the 3133, that was as a must-do, contractual increases, right? For the diving coach, the .25 FTE, that is an existing role that was added partway through the year. It was funded this year because we've had some savings with the buses that have not been running, the challenges we've been experiencing there, and then using the two white buses that we have outside. The thought process here was for the $941 in the grand scheme of things to peel back that program, especially where it is a very well participated in program. We felt it was appropriate to include it there. And then also the Unified Sports program for $2,000. We felt even though that's not an existing program, for the $2,000, looking at this department and the asks that have been there, as well as to not including any of the increases for the supplies and services budget, we did include that in this proposal. Working down to the district-wide programs, the District Health and Wellness Coordinator, .5 position, that is a full-time position right now. It is fully funded through ESSER, similar to the math specialist at the middle school. We've earmarked funds out of ESSER through September 30th of 2024 to fully fund that position. It was included in the budget proposal because we want to start transitioning that role over to our operating budget. But that, by not including it here, we're not saying the position will go away. It will continue to be funded by ESSER. The stabilization fund transfer, this one was shown as high priority. However, when we look at what the future holds or what it may hold with our stabilization fund, with the needs of this building, and then with hopefully having a feasibility study in the future, we have that $1.5 million in stabilization to pay for this, for that potential feasibility study. However, as we work towards the future and inflationary costs that will undoubtedly add to that, we felt it was prudent to include this transfer in the proposal so that we're not going backwards. The elementary performing arts was not included in this proposal at this point. The late buses, while it's been fantastic to run those 4 days a week at the middle school, high school level, and in the past we had included those at the elementary school level, we've not yet included that here. Changes in leadership and admin, even though that's a smaller number, that's actually a larger increase in our legal fees line items that correlates with our actual expenditure levels due to increases in usage as well as increased in rates that were being charged.
Kyle, just to clarify on the
Yep.
late buses. So by not including the 79,800, that means we continue running late buses just at the middle school, high school for 2 days per week?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Change in instructional is going to be the substitutes. We've talked about that. Changes in student services, transportation. This has been slightly different from the last proposal where based on increased in rates associated with level service, we're calculating a $60,000 increase over the current year. Within those assumptions, it's all of our buses running, including a one-tier bus that we have not been running. And based on our current student population levels, we don't anticipate, even though we want to maintain the total number of buses there, we really don't anticipate needing that one-tier bus, which was a total of 64,800, or just about that. So that's why you see included as actually a savings. A little quirky there. Facilities, we've talked at length about. Retirement and insurance, health insurance, again, a 5.6% potential renewal. Steps and COLA we spoke of. I won't get into details on these again in the interest of time. Working our way to the last page. Student services, again, looking at what are the must-dos and cost mitigating factors where we can, certain line items where we've outsourced in the past for services, bringing those in-house, so the speech and language therapist and registered behavioral technicians. We've had line items within the contracted services budget to pay for these, and then we've supplemented that because of the increased needs with ESSER funding. So we're proposing bringing those two positions in-house because it is ultimately cost savings. Summer programming and special ed transportation we've spoken of. That's a big category there. I'll pause to see if anybody has any questions on the student services grouping. All right, keep moving.
I was going to say, just to make sure that
Yep.
it's clear, the 911,872 for the out-of-district.
Oh,
did you-
thank you. I didn't. Appreciate that. That's a big one. So some say the biggest. Special ed tuition. So that increase, I did end up having a phone call with a representative over at DESE on Monday about the potential funding of extraordinary relief, where legislation dictates if our costs increase more than 25% in a given year, instead of having to wait the next year for reimbursement, we can receive reimbursement in the current year. There's a whole process that we need to go about for claiming that reimbursement. However, we can reasonably anticipate receiving those funds in the current year. And then also, just looking at the nature of these, where Shannon did a really nice job itemizing out all of the potential placements, and then kind of the risk, I hate to use that word, the potential whether that student will remain in district or go out of district. Where there's such a high degree of variability there, we have the potential, we have the opportunity with our circuit breaker reserves, or the fund balance within that circuit breaker revolving account, to weather that variability. We spoke about how we would be able to create a plan to bring back those reserves for however much we have to dip into it. So at this point in time, again, given the scope of the budget increases we're looking at this year, we felt that the ability to take that increase off the table this year just puts us in a much more stable, all things considered, position. So that's why we have not included it there.
And I was just going to say, Narissa had brought up at the workshop about, I forget the exact figure, feeling more comfortable with like 650 or 700. I think the reality is there's the huge variability of that one student. But then on top of that, when you layer in, Kyle, Shannon, and I were sitting chatting the other day, and literally Shannon got an email that could potentially be very positive news, and positive news, right, to the tune of almost 100,000. So as these things change just as quickly, it hasn't happened yet, she could get an email tomorrow that it's going in the other direction. So we're confident that it would be, if we're tapping, it's going to be more in that 600,000-700,000, and I honestly don't even think it will be that. But as Kyle said, keeping that variability in a revolving account that allows us to just ebb and flow and adjust with it rather than making the assumption in the general fund. If we then have that funding, it looks like we floated the budget rather than just addressing it within the revolving and the circuit breaker account, which is what it's designed to do.
Thank you. District-wide curriculum and instruction, we ended up moving all of these categories or budgeted line items over to the included proposal. with curriculum, we don't, not to sound cliche, if we're not moving forward here, we're moving backwards, right? So where this is such a high need, you can jump into this one.
I feel like you just quoted Ricky Bobby. Ain't first or last. That just happened. I mean, Anna can reiterate, but I think when we spoke about this on Saturday, the things we were talking about, when we talk about actual must-dos, I think even the things where we talked about would be a high priority, whether it be a textbook with history lessons dating back to 1998, I think none of us felt comfortable calling those high priorities. Those were all must-dos. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Anna spoke about it more on Saturday, but.
I don't.
Thank you, Anna.
Similar type thought process with the district-wide technology and the Chromebook implementation there, where we've already made such a significant progress towards this program. If we don't include it, we're moving backwards, right? So we did include that 50,000. So looking at the totals there, total district-wide increases, and the summary of all of the proposals that were included in the presentations were 5.4 million. In this, the total of the included column is 2,587,471, and excluded from it presently is that 2.8 million. When we spoke on Saturday about giving you a net increase of 2.5 million, we want to also factor in revenue assumptions. So we were pretty conservative here for the time being, and still waiting on information from the state, but Chapter 70 reasonably assuming a $30 per pupil increase in our state funding, that would yield an additional $66,000. Regional transportation right now, so in the current year budget, we assumed an 80% reimbursement rate, which is relatively conservative. In fiscal '22, we received 90-something% of a reimbursement rate. That was a strong year for us, but that 80% is a safe bet. Interest income, we left flat for now, and then Medicaid reimbursement, where those revenue sources, revenue income has trended upwards over the past year, due in large part to the efforts of Shannon training our staff on billing for Medicaid. We have seen that has yielded the additional income there, so we are pretty comfortable increasing that line item from 150,000 to 200,000, the net increase of 50 that you see there. So all in, these 3 pages include 2.4 million, 2,470,751, as shown.
Can I ask one question? Thank you, Kyle.
Sorry, that wasn't 5 minutes.
No. Getting beyond the ridiculous nature of 116,000 of new revenues from state and other sources when we have close to 2.5 million in increased costs. Setting that aside, did you mention the 75 to capital, the stabilization?
I did,
So,
yeah.
so just to make sure that the things that we've set out as priorities, and I know we've had the conversation around the table and here, that those items, whether it be curriculum that we've neglected for far too long, or reserves that we've neglected for far too long, this still maintains those commitments, which I would say I would protect that 75,000 over other items on this list, just because we have to start playing the long game.
Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Paul.
I have concerns about 3 in particular of the line items that were listed as cost mitigating that are not included. So Kyle, you meant, so one of those is I'm just going to say them first, the 2 instructional assistants at NES, because those were tied to the ALPS and TLC program. And I have concerns about, like, I want to be certain, if we're not going to fund those, that we're also not going to lose students out of those programs because we can't service them. The special education halftime teacher at Pine Grove, that seems to be tied to a lot of Wilson services that we're currently paying for, so I'd like to hear more about what you mentioned that there was possibly ways of dealing with that, so hearing more, I'd love to hear more about what those plans are. And then also there was $50,000 in facilities that it sounded like that was doing increased work at the high school, so like the roof doesn't literally collapse on us. So those are three places where I'm concerned that if we don't fund them, we might be spending more that is unbudgeted. So,
So I'll take a first pass at that. So with the IAs, as I mentioned, I don't need to reiterate, but we have current staffing levels to address all one-to-one support. So these would be added supports for those students. So go ahead. Yeah.
We're taking a risk by not budgeting them.
Yep.
But that risk could very easily pay out, and we might not need them. So this is more based on kind of the trend we've been seeing, which has been adding, not reducing. I think as we've kind of talked this through, we carry a salary contingency line, and there is, I think, 150. And you don't, in years past, you've seen an increase in that line because we draw it down in the fall adjusted budget, and then we have to replenish it. So that line is at 150 in the current budget, so we don't have to increase that. So that's how we've historically addressed, we've added, how many, I don't know if I want to know the number, how many IAs? We've added a few IAs over the course of this year. And again, we still have all our salary contingency because the way it played out on our payroll of $27 million, we've had some people, new hires come in lower than where we market, we kind of target that M6, M7 range, and we've had M1s come in. We've had some M6011s come in, but it ebbs and flows as you go through. So to put the 100,000, is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? I don't know for me, I don't know if I would say it's likely enough that I want to carve out that 100,000 for that. You're talking about the music instruction, that might be different, but.
And the key there too is that salary contingency line item. That mitigates our risk to a degree. This year, we were able, like you mentioned, we added a significant number of IAs. We were able to do that through available funds because of transition savings as well as school choice or things of that nature. We were able to fully fund those 8 additional positions, but we were also in a much better, things weren't as tight this year, right, as we've moved forward towards, or what we're looking towards for next year. But that salary contingency line item in my mind is key.
Yeah.
Same thing with the special education teacher at Pine Grove, as we're moving towards that if we did have to revert back.
And that's a work in progress that we're working through, right? Because that would replace, Kyle already mentioned this, but that would replace what's currently being paid out through contracted services for tutors providing those Wilson services. And so there's ongoing discussion about what can be delivered by current existing special educators who have received additional training. A lot of this has been, if you don't have the training, you can't provide those services, whether it be Wilson or in Gillingham. So that could change, but I can tell you by the time we get to a tentative budget, that those services will be accounted for confidently, whether we have to tuck that back in or we're able to massage it through contracted services as it has been. And then the other one was?
The stabilization, thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, the facilities, yeah.
Yeah.
In the district-wide programs under changes in facilities, there was a $130,000 request, and you've got 60,000 included in 70,000 not. And I believe when that was broken out more finely for us, 50,000 of that was an increase to doing additional maintenance in order to help preserve the building until we get to a renovation.
No, absolutely. So refresher on that line, the facilities line to the 60,000, that was the increase in our contract for grounds maintenance, and then the 50,000, like you you said is for proactive work. I guess it's kind of proactive.
Mostly reactive.
And so I won't take full credit for this one because Narissa raised a great point at the meeting on Saturday, where within the allowable use of our stabilization fund is capital purposes. So managing risk here is, even though I would absolutely love to include the additional $50,000 and it would be well used, by peeling that back and including the $75,000 stabilization fund transfer, we're managing that risk to a degree, because if we do have a cost that's significant jump up, we could use those funds, even though I had just gotten done saying how we need to plan for the future for that feasibility study. But that was the thought process there, is that we could manage the risk using the stabilization fund.
But just to clarify, there's no outstanding project with a $50,000 price tag, like the roof over the middle school
Yeah.
wing. So that was
Yeah.
a chunk set aside to deal with issues as they arise.
And within the 50,000, 35,000 of that was associated with this campus here. And then the remaining portion was bringing the maintenance budgets at the 3 elementary schools in line with one another, so they could each be more proactive equally. Thanks for asking.
Erin, do you have any questions?
I don't, thank you.
I just want to make sure she was paying attention.
That was the test and she passed. I don't think any of us have any other questions. I mean, I want to thank you all for the work on this budget. I know it's a tough year, and we'd love to have everything put into the budget for all of our schools, but we know that's not possible.
So safe to assume, again, we're going to come back and we'll have again, I can tell you the Pine Grove Special Education Teachers one we've been talking about. As far as the rest of the priorities, I guess we'll say, even the 2.8 that isn't included are all important items. But as far as the target of 2.5, you're comfortable staying at the 2.5? And at this point, comfortable with the overall priorities that we laid out here and don't want to see anything different next week?
No, I
Okay.
think you put in most of everything that we wanted to make sure was in the budget.
Very good. Thank you.
So if nobody has anything else, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Nope. Executive session.
So we're going to go into executive session, not to return to open session. We need a roll call vote.
You need a motion first.
Have a motion first.
Sorry.
I move we enter into executive session, not to return to open session.
No, you need to read the whole thing in the, it's a legal thing.
Where says that right here?
Yeah.
All right, do you want me to read it, Paul? I'm using her computer. The committee is expected to go into executive session. Oh,
I make a motion for the committee to go into executive session.
I'll make a motion for the committee to go into executive session for the purpose of planning and setting strategy for negotiations with union personnel, specifically the TRTA units A and B, not to return to open session.
I'll second.
Can we have a roll call vote? Paul Lees.
Yes.
Susanna?
Yes.
Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Paul Goldner?
Yes?
Matthew?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Larissa?
Yes?
Erin?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. Thank you. Have a nice